Sorry. Professor, can you use the microphone? Just to...
One of these two?
yeah, I guess so.
Okay. Sure. Hello, hello?
Yeah, yes, perfect.
Maybe I will introduce it first. Can you all hear me? Okay, good. So, welcome to our workshop, the use of AI in academia, research ethics and tools, organized by the CJD project, Conflict Justice Decolonization is in transition in the 21st century. So the CJD project primarily serves as a platform for graduate students and emerging scholars to publish their work and actively engage in the public sphere through their intellectual contributions, whether it be addressing urgent social issues, exploring artistic interventions, or other critical concerns. And this is our account on social medias, if you're interested, and also welcome to send your contributions every semester. So the project is housed within the International Center for Cultural Studies and is affiliated with the Interasia Cultural Studies Department at NYCU, which are also co-organizers of today's event. And the reason we wanted to organize this workshop is that many of us find ourselves in a state of ambiguity about how we can use AI in our research. And at times we also feel guilty, probably because we don't fully understand the limits and risks of using AI, or because we are unaware of its potential to enhance our own research process and work. So I think the key issue here is not whether we should use AI, but because it's already here and it's pervasive. But the real question is how we can learn to think and write better with AI rather than stop thinking altogether because of AI. So we want to avoid, of course, just using it as a time-saving tool that leads us to delegate everything, including our critical thinking. So our speaker today, Alexandre Erler, is Associate Professor at the Institute of Philosophy of Mind at Cognition at National Yamin Jalton University. He earned his doctorate in philosophy from the University of Oxford, where he was affiliated with Uehiro Center for Practical Ethics. He is a philosopher whose work explores issues arising from scientific and technological developments with the potential to profoundly transform society and the human condition, including research in artificial intelligence and brain science. And his current research focuses on philosophical, ethical, and political challenges raised by emerging AI technologies, including their implications for human rights and democracy. So thank you, Professor Erler, for accepting our invitation and for traveling to our campus today. And let's warmly welcome our speaker. And I leave the stage to you.
Thank you, Serena, for your kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me over for participating in this discussion. Thank you to all members of the CJD project who are involved in running this. I think you're organizing a very timely discussion. As you said, AI now is really becoming pervasive. It's, it's also there's constantly discussion of it, and it is disruptive. It's clearly a disruptive technology. We can have a debate as to how impactful or how transformative it's going to prove over the next few years. We hear crazier and crazier things, right? If you follow the news, you see these interviews. And it is becoming quite, I don't know, I guess both exciting and scary, right? At the same time, for a while we've had some people like very future-oriented, maybe you've heard of Ray Kurzweil, these kind of people to saying about how AI was going to completely transform the human condition. In his case, for the better, he's a techno-optimist, but they were often viewed as somewhat, maybe if not crimes, kind of relatively isolated voices who may have been overhyping the technology for a while. That's, I think, how the mainstream was perceiving them. But now you have Nobel Prize winners telling us that we're going to have artificial general intelligence by the end of this decade. So it is becoming, this idea of a radical transformation is becoming more mainstream, and it is quite striking. But today, I guess we're going to talk more about the present or the near future, so we don't have to, I guess, concern ourselves too much about the radical developments that might be coming. But I guess, as you said, it's here. It is already disruptive, and that's why we need to think about it. That's why we need to figure out what responsible use is. I agree with your claim that turning away or just forfeiting it as a completely is not really a realistic course of action, although we could discuss whether there are, and I think there are contexts where we need to eliminate it or to refrain from using it, specific targeted contexts, but we can discuss these. So I understand I have 45 minutes for my talk. So that's what I'm going to aim for. And this is the plan for my talk. I'm going to start with a brief review of the AI tools that are relevant to this discussion, which is about academia, right? Following the title of this workshop. And I think you will be familiar with many of them. I will try not to spend too much time on this section, but I think it's good to have still at least a recap or an overview of what we're talking about, relevant tools. Then I'm going to say a few words about the promise of that as is often presented, the promise of AI for higher education, what benefits can we expect, and then probably the longest section, maybe the most interesting one, about the concerns, the ethical concerns that these raise. And I can say maybe from the get-go, I won't purport to be exhaustive. The concerns that I will deal with, I guess I will highlight those that I find most relevant or interesting, but to some extent this is my perspective, and if you may well have other concerns which you think maybe I have not dealt enough with, and I understand there will be another 45 minutes for discussion where you can raise these points, and be happy to discuss concerns you may have. But yeah, trying to be exhaustive in 45 minutes I think would be impossible anyway. So, okay, let's begin just with this overview of the tools that are relevant to our discussion. And now when we have these debates and concerns about AI, generative AI is very much at the center. So this set of AI applications that, as their name indicates, can generate content of some kind. What kind of content? Well, more and more diverse content, right? In different media. Text is the main example, I guess, very relevant to us, since we are also expected to produce text, right? That's a large part of what we spend our time on. Well, AI turns out now can do that very effectively. So you know what large language models are, right? ChatGPT and the others, Google Gemini and so on. There's the US-based ones, and there's some Chinese ones as well by Baidu and other tech companies, and you've heard about DeepSeek, I guess, and this controversy that occurred recently. Their performance appears to have more or less caught up with that of the US-based ones, although one unfortunate aspect, obviously, is that they're subject to Chinese communist censorship. So there are questions you cannot ask them. There are Taiwan-grown LLMs now, right? There's this one called Let's see if I am able to use this pointer. Is it on the side? Or thanks. Just wanted not to cause any catastrophe. Thanks. Yeah, this one. So that's a Taiwan developed LLM, which I understand our own university here is using for some applications, maybe a chatbot, I think something to do with Taiwanese and Hakka languages, that's what I read. And it's trained, it's supposed to be culturally sensitive, right, to Taiwanese culture and trained on traditional Chinese characters and to provide an alternative to the Chinese-based ones, which are going to have, besides the political, constraints and restrictions, they're going to be trained on different kinds of data that may be also not so relevant to Taiwan, be less able to deal with, for instance, traditional characters. So this, obviously, there's a big boom there. These are very have been impact also for anyone who works in academia. There are other writing aids, you might say, that are rely on AI. You have these tools that paraphrase and summarize text, although they don't generate it from scratch like the LLMs do. Quillbot is an example. Perhaps I can mention personally, I use some of these tools, but I'm far from having experience with all of them. In fact, I don't have direct experience of most of these tools, but I've learned about them partly thanks to events like these, because I had to, learn about everything that's out there. And there is a lot, but I don't have direct experience of all of these. LLMs I have got a bit of experience using, but there are these tools which are not strictly called generative because they change text rather than creating it from scratch. You know about Grammarly and other writing assistants like WordTune, which supposed to help you improve text and grammar. All of these now incorporate AI features. Now you have what people call AI research assistants. For example, several of these LLMs have something called a deep research function, where you can ask them, with a prompt, you ask them to go online and search the web for the information that's relevant to you, and they can produce a report for you, maybe a literature review, for example. So that's why also people are talking about now us moving into the era of AI agents, right? These AI tools that can take more and more autonomous actions. Once you give them a goal, they go out there and they can take action by searching for information, and well, in the future they should be able maybe to make purchases and take other action on our behalf. This is, I guess, the beginning of this phenomenon. We have tools like Elicit AI, which are similar, but this one is, I think, quite oriented towards academia, can help with literature reviews and article summaries. To some extent, there's some overlap between some of these tools that I'm describing here. There are tools like Research Rabbit. This one is meant to help you discover articles that are relevant to what you're working on, and then they can create some maps showing connections between different articles. And you have tools that can help you with your presentations. One of them is called Tome IA, and another one is called Gamma. I haven't used these tools personally. The most I've used in this context is the designer function on PowerPoint, but which is, I guess, also another such tool can be pretty useful, I find, for visuals, to efficiently create visuals for your presentations, but there's more out there now available. And there's more. There are still other examples. So I'm not just trying to offer an overview, not an exhaustive list. another aspect, I think pretty exciting generally, but also relevant potentially to academia. AI-powered tools that can help us create very vivid or entertaining visual or audiovisual content, such as deepfakes, right? Okay, deepfakes, they're potentially a source of many ethical concerns, and I'm writing a paper about that actually, but they have, you know, various possible uses, and in education we can imagine, well, I mean, I guess you know what deepfakes are, right? You have, it's like videos or sound content or images that look like they're real documents of something that happened, like photos or like videos that were shot from an event that actually happened, but in fact they're not. They're created from scratch based on prompts, using again deep learning. And often fake might suggest that, oh, they're showing stuff that didn't happen, and yes, often that's the case, but it doesn't have to be the case. Sorry if that's me like talking too much like a philosopher and kind of getting into complications about definitions, but yeah, the point is just that you could in principle use deepfakes not to fabricate or to show something that didn't happen. You could actually use a deepfake to show something that actually happened, and that could be relevant to education, right? Recreate a famous historical event that happened a long time ago, so there's no documented footage of it, but maybe based on the evidence we have, we create like a movie of whatever, the battle of some Roman antiquity or whichever period, or in Chinese, ancient China, any event you might be interested in illustrating. It will still be a deepfake because it's not actual, you know, footage. So, but it could, I think you can see how this could help generate very kind of ripping and entertaining content within also academic teaching. So the technology is already pretty impressive. You have different tools. You have some are avatar-based, like HeyGen. These are tools, so you have a person talking, but the person is an avatar, and it could be something that's already offered by the tech company, or you could create your own avatar by having enough pictures of yourself from various angles. Then you can create your own avatar and have your own digital version of yourself talking in a video. Or you have, maybe the most spectacular ones are these, right? Sora, those of you who have paid for ChatGPT Plus may have tried Sora, the video generator, which creates, well, basically quite short videos unless you deliberately extend them, but you can, I think visually the results are already pretty impressive. And initially I had created a small video which I thought was funny, featuring a chimpanzee dressed like a university professor. But then I realized when I saw all the stuff that they were posting on social media recently about VO3, I realized, wow, what I have done is really not that impressive. I mean Sora is just not as impressive as VO3, which is Google DeepMind's tool, partly because VO3 also incorporates sound, so it's like really a full-fledged movie that you can create from scratch, and you may have seen some of these videos. Let's see if I can play one. It's very short. Oh, I think it should work.
This ocean is.
Make it bigger.
This ocean is a force, a wild, untamed might, and she commands your awe with every breaking light.
Okay, their account has lots of videos like that. It's just, I think it's pretty amazing, right? Well, what is it doing now? Because it's created from scratch, right? This is not a real person or a live voice, it's all created by AI. So yeah, there's a lot of potential there for creative uses. There's also voice cloning, where you can recreate someone's voice in a digital form based on existing recordings. Again, you can imagine great uses and very bad ones, funny stuff or disinformation, and so that's the nature of this technology. Now, AI detection tools, right? They are important here, and they're also powered by AI. So, right, Turnitin, we're used to Turnitin here at NYCU, but now, I don't know if our university has the version that has the AI detection features, not to my knowledge, but maybe I'm insufficiently informed. But Turnitin does offer one version of the tool that has AI detection incorporated, and then it will give you a percentage. If you scan a text, it will tell you, oh, it estimates that such and such percentage of the text is AI generated. And there's other similar tools, GPT-0 and others. I think these tools raise ethical concerns. I will come back to them later. Personally, I use only like the more old school version of Turnitin, which is all about just making sure there's no copying and pasting from existing texts. That's the old model. There's many more applications of AI we could cite here, because also it's being incorporated into almost everything, right? Adobe Acrobat now has an AI assistant which you can ask it questions. Also, you can ask it questions about the content of a text that you have in PDF. You have to pay though, it's not free. You have AI code generators, right, relevant to computer scientists. Even reference management tools apparently now, like EndNote, have incorporated AI. So AI is almost everywhere. If we briefly look at the future, now we're being told by people like Jeffrey Hinton, the famous AI researcher, that we're going to have superhuman AI tutors in a few years from now. We can already use some of these chatbots, like ChatGPT, as tutors. And I mean, to some extent, I have done that. You can ask it, like if you encounter a problem or there's an idea you don't understand in some whatever field you are studying, you can ask ChatGPT if it can explain it to you. And sometimes it can be very helpful, in my experience. It can help you better understand things and faster. It may not be 100% reliable, that's the caveat. We still have to be careful. It may be better at some fields than others. I mean, some of my students have told me that it was very bad at chemistry, I think. Maybe you have some experiences as well you can contribute or share about this. But it's also a dynamic phenomenon. They are supposed to be constantly improving them. So in the future, the idea is there's going to be brilliant AI tutors that can provide personalized learning to all students, right? You have this system which is available 24/7, and you can ask it questions, as many as you want, and you won't have the restrictions that are involved with professors that are not always available, and every student can learn at their own pace or explore more what they want to explore rather than having to rely on more like generic choices made by the teacher. So that, on the one hand, that sounds amazing, right? Really improving learning for everyone, including in a university context. On the other hand, how much space does that leave for human tutors or human teachers? That's the concern. I guess we'll see. This major question: to what extent do these technologies augment our existing jobs? To what extent do they threaten to replace these jobs? Okay. If anyone has any questions, anything was unclear, please feel free to raise your hand. So, if everything's clear so far, I'll say a few words about the promise of AI in this context of higher education. I guess the main idea is, very much in this logic of optimization and greater efficiency and productivity and making our life easier. The idea is that with AI we'll just be more effective and more productive in our work. We can ask AI to I expected this would happen. It's okay. Fix it. Oh, okay. So I need to go back where I was. Is it? Oh yeah. You will be able to ask AI to summarize papers for us when we press for time. Like having your own personal research assistant, right? Then you can save time, you can get the gist. If you have lots of things to read, you can get the gist of some of them, and then you can more easily meet your deadline, for example. So we'll be more productive. Various processes will be streamlined. So with the deepfake example, for example, that could show us how we can make educational materials more engaging, and we can also make education more accessible, partly through the use of these personal tutors. That for data analysis, I guess it's also quite clear what the potential of AI is, and help us get some insights from large amounts of data. That's what AI is good at, among other things. It's supposed to help us write more effectively and perhaps better, right? Have very clean, grammatically flawless writing. And I've touched on this issue of personal education also before. All of these things are part of AI's promise, right? So if you're an optimist, I guess that's what you'll emphasize. And I do think that there's at least some truth to that. I don't think this is all just hype. But as most technologies, AI, even if it has benefits, also has other effects, or at least presents risks. And it's important to be aware of these and discuss these. And because it's a disruptive technology, we need to have rules, set new rules for how we're going to use it. And we're still in the process of doing that, right? Making it up as we go along, as it were, partly because it's happening very fast. So that's what I'm going to focus on in this third part, the ethical concerns that these developments raise. So this is just kind of a historical, I guess, introduction to these concerns. The fact that, well, the arrival of LLMs, one of the main concerns that it gave rise to was this idea of cheating and misuse, right? or academic malpractice, plagiarism. Lots of people, lots of universities got really worried about this. And initially that led to a wave of bans on the technology. So these are just some headlines taken from, I think mostly, the first two are from 2023. You have universities in France and in the United States and elsewhere that issued these bans. They said it is against the university's rules to use large language models to write your assignments, right? This is going to be considered cheating. And I think since then the situation has evolved and many of these bans have been repealed. You also had journals like the science journals that initially said, we think it's just academic malpractice to use AI to write a paper, so you should not be doing that if you submit to our journals. They've adopted more flexible and tolerant policies. For various reasons, I guess one probably has to do with feasibility, right? It is difficult to enforce a ban if you have a ban on AI use, because, well, one reason is that there are workarounds, right? Well, perhaps even before that, you have this problem of identifying AI use. Now, I mentioned there are these AI detectors, but it's not clear how reliable they are. There are serious questions around this. Then there's the question of how much AI use is acceptable, if any. Is any degree of AI use acceptable, or if the detector says, oh, this is 1% AI generated, is that again already violating this kind of policy? And even if that's the solution that the school adopts, then there's a question of, can students or researchers, in cases of academic journals, can they use tricks to avoid this detection? And it looks like they can, right? You can maybe use a paraphrasing tool and then see maybe the detector will not catch the text not declaring AI generated if it's been entirely paraphrased, or you could paraphrase it yourself. The student could paraphrase the text written originally by the AI, but not contribute any new ideas, and then evade detection, and so on. Of course, it might be even easier if you're if professors are just using their judgment, their personal judgment to decide, oh, was this AI generated or not? Here, I think there's a great risk of overconfidence, right? If someone believes, oh, I can reliably identify AI-generated texts, there are all kinds of tricks that could be used to mislead here. If you're perverse enough, you could deliberately prompt the LLM to insert some grammatical mistakes that would be typical of a student in the circumstances, and then you trick the professor. So it is technically very challenging. Also, is it a good idea? I think more and more people have come to the conclusion that it may be counterproductive to try and keep AI out of schoolwork or research. That rather trying to foster responsible use and setting appropriate limits but not hard limits is more constructive. So that's where we are now, mostly. But then there's this question of what responsible limits are. Now, this concern about cheating has not disappeared by any means, and this is a headline from an article that came out about 2 weeks ago. I think it was in New York Magazine. Some of you may have read it or have come across it. It was quite alarmist, and lots of people kind of were sharing it. Professors were sharing it. This strong title, striking title, everyone is cheating their way through college using large language models like ChatGPT. That's what the author was claiming. He interviewed many students, including some who were explicitly looking for ways to cheat. There was a Korean-American student who was apparently making it his last mission to find ways to use AI to help people cheat at all kinds of things, including writing essays, doing live interviews online, right? You have some AI system that would give answers to questions and some way of hiding that if you had to share your screen. Yeah, I'm not sure this guy is using his intelligence in the best possible way, but anyway, that was an extreme case that was highlighted in this article, and the author was saying that many students were largely relying on AI to write their written assignments, and that many professors didn't know how to deal with that, and many of them were discouraged and saying there's no way, right? Now it all feels useless because we can't control what's happening, and then it might seem like the whole assignment enterprise is useless because you're just grading what ChatGPT has come up with. So I think it's clear there is a threat of plagiarism, right? It's possible to use these tools for cheating. Now, of course, cheating is always defined in terms of a set of rules, right? If it's not forbidden, then it's not cheating. But still, I think it's quite clear that university assignments, for example, are meant to test certain capacities or skills, and if AI threatens the ability of those assignments to test for that, then there's a problem, and we are potentially dealing with some kind of malpractice, right? So I think the question is not, is any use of AI plagiarism or malpractice? Clearly some cases are, but where do we draw the line? That is, I think, the challenge. Of course, it's easier if we are went into a complete anti-AI stance, then we can say any use is cheating, but that would not be reasonable, I think. So then maybe the next answer is, well, it's too much. We should not rely too much on AI, which I completely agree with. I mean, that's a correct response, but again, it's not very precise. We need to have clearer guidelines. And here, I think we're kind of seeing people getting divided, or academics getting divided into these two camps, which I call the liberals versus the conservatives. So I would call myself a liberal in the sense that, generally speaking, I think AI can make a good contribution to academic work, even though it has to be used responsibly and some limits have to be placed. Conservatives are people who think that generally AI is a pernicious influence, and that we should try as much as we can to keep it out of academia to the extent that we can. I think we don't have to all agree about what the correct answer is. I think it's okay to some extent to have a certain diversity of opinion among, for instance, professors or academic journals on this. But having clear rules is important. Even if, say, you have different teachers setting their own rules for their courses, it's important that the rules be clearly stated. And yeah, I do happen to think some rules are probably more helpful than others. And we can discuss that further later on. Encouraging transparency is desirable, right? If we can, that's a part of responsible practice, I think. Getting to the habit of acknowledging that if we've used AI, acknowledging that we did, and maybe explaining briefly that's what I ask my students to do, to explain briefly how they've used it. One can also be more demand more and more information. Some professors demand transcripts, copy of the transcripts of their exchanges with the language model. So there's a question there, you know, what's the best practice? Now, I mentioned that I have some concerns about the detection of AI use. And, well, the first one has to do with the risk of false positives. These tools are not fully reliable as far as I'm aware. Sometimes, you know, we regularly hear strange examples. We have some authors who say, I put this part of my book or part of the Bible in this AI detector, and it said it was 99% AI generated. So, you know, even if overall they get quite good results, maybe that's the case, maybe Turnitin, for example, they claim to be very accurate, but while if occasionally you get a false positive, then someone might be unfairly accused of cheating. And, you know, for the same reason that the presumption of innocence seems like a good idea, I think we should be very cautious to avoid false positives. So, and it's difficult if the policy is that the AI is the authority as to whether the text was AI generated or not. I've mentioned the tricks that can be used to avoid detection. So if some students use these tricks and others are more honest and don't use them, then we might have an unfair situation, right? Where the Machiavellian people are being rewarded and the honest actors are being punished or limited in what they can do. And another question here, which I think is quite central, is, well, even if we could really trust those percentages confidently, what kind of information are we getting from them? If I hear that this text was 50% AI generated, what can I conclude from that? Can I just say, well, that is too much because there's a cutoff point at what, 30%? I think it is possible that there's a floor, right? That beyond a certain percentage, we can conclude that the person did not contribute enough to the content, and that therefore it should get a bad grade. That's possible. But if we have, say, 50-50 or perhaps a greater human contribution or somewhere in that vicinity, it seems that, you know, the percentage can refer to all kinds of different scenarios. You could have, well, the student wrote the first half of the essay, then they ran out of time, they just used ChatGPT to finish the essay and copied and pasted it. That's pretty bad, right? If the student does that. But it could also mean the student wrote the first draft and then put it through ChatGPT to try and improve the writing, maybe get some extra ideas, test the arguments, and so on, but they really thought through the whole content and they take responsibility for it and they've made a judgment that it was good. Then in that case, I think the student may well have done a good job, maybe a very good job. That was maybe an example of a successful human-AI collaboration, but it's going to get the same percentage from the detector. So in that case, these percentages are not sufficiently informative, right? They're too crude. De-skilling is a risk with AI generally, also in this context. Serena mentioned, you know, the threat to critical thinking. If we just let the AI think for us, we just ask it what is the answer to this problem, and we just accept the response. That is bad, that is a problem. We're not doing what we should be doing, and there's also risk if we uncritically accept the AI's output. For instance, if we overestimate its reliability and then we fall prey to errors. Sometimes these systems make mistakes, sometimes they hallucinate, they make up facts or references that can contaminate the work that we do, so that is definitely a risk. There are other forms of de-skilling that we could be concerned about, having to do with reading skills, writing skills, or the skill to synthesize information. I think all these concerns are reasonable, although I think we also need to ask this question here, which is, what are the skills in the kind of world we're going to be living in for the next few years, to the extent that we can predict that, what kind of skills do we think people need, right? And what kind of skills should we cultivate in ourselves and in students? And I think it's important that the answer might involve saying that some skills that were central before are going to be less central. Maybe writing will be done differently from now on. Maybe writing will be more like a core authorship model that involves AI tools and a human contribution. In which case, it might be less clear that it's really important to teach people to write on their own. Maybe you will still have a reason to say, well, that's how people should first learn how to write, but if the new norm is co-authoring with AI, then I think teaching needs to take this into account. So at least it's important to try and think in terms of this. What skills will be needed in an AI-saturated world? And so to avoid some of these risks, one solution that I've implemented personally is to try and focus more on in-class interactions and in-class assignments, like open book exams with no electronics allowed, to practice critical thinking in my students, which is one of the key goals of my teaching. That's what I've decided, kind of selective exclusion of AI. And I think at different levels, like undergraduate versus graduate, maybe I'll make more space for written assignments, for instance for graduate students, partly because more of them may be involved in writing in their future careers. But some of my undergraduate students who are not studying philosophy may not have that skill as relevant in their careers. So that's, I think, one part of the solution. There are some unfortunate aspects to this, right? So for example, depending on the student's personality, some people may find themselves more comfortable communicating in writing than orally, like in live interaction. If you're more introverted or shy, I can see how this could be an undesirable development. Unfortunately, it's unclear what's the alternative to opening the floodgates to cheating and then defeating the purpose of the assignments. So there are ways one can try and attenuate this problem by encouraging everyone to express themselves and creating the right kind of classroom environment. But clearly there are some drawbacks to this. Emphasizing responsibility for the submitted output, both for students and researchers, that's crucial. So the idea being, it's fine if you get some summaries from AI or from some facts from AI, you just use them in your writing, but you have to, like, if it turns out that the AI got it wrong or hallucinated, you're responsible, right, for the fact that this is in your essay. You can't just say, oh, well, it's OpenAI's fault. They didn't do a good job with ChatGPT. I mean, we are responsible for fact-checking, making sure there's no errors, right? Within reason. This is just a chart showing that the hallucination problem, unfortunately, hasn't gone away with large language models. In fact, it seems like, based on research by these very companies, like this is research from OpenAI, the latest models, the most powerful ones, hallucinate at a higher rate than older ones, which is disturbing. But that is what's the current state of affairs. Sorry. One aspect that I've been interested in also in my research is these potential threats to diversity, by which I mean both diversity in the way we write and diversity in the way we think. There's a concern that if we rely more on LLMs in our work, we will all write more in the same way or think more the same way because we'll be influenced by the same source or sources. Now I do want to say diversity, again, this is a term that could have different facets. You might think that in some ways having more homogeneous content could be good. Suppose we have more articles that are clearly written with perfect grammar, or if quality, overall quality could be improved, or the significance of the topics we wrote on was overall higher, if we could somehow measure that. I think this would be good developments. But there are other forms, other aspects where having less diversity scrutiny seems undesirable, right? If we had, less intellectual diversity, as John Stuart Mill famously argued, it's if you have freedom of thought and freedom of expression and a kind of marketplace of ideas where ideas can compete with each other and people can engage in constructive debates, hopefully that's how you find the best ideas. If there's groupthink or intimidation and so on, we will not make as much progress. There's a risk that some original ideas we may have had if we had taken more time to let our ideas mature or reflect more by ourselves, that this will be lost if we delegate more of the thinking to AI. I think that's a reasonable concern. And for writing, I think that here maybe different fields might be less affected, more or less affected. But you might think maybe in science there's not as much of a concern if the idea is that mostly writing in science is meant to clearly convey some results. And maybe if everyone writes the same way, that will be fine. I think there's some complications there. It depends what aspects of science we're talking about. Maybe that's more truer of peer-reviewed, academic papers. But scientists also write books for a more general audience, and here the style of the writer seems more important and can make a difference to the value of the book. So there are definitely also for the arts and humanities, writing style seems to be more relevant to our enjoyment of a specific work. So if we lose, some individuality in writing, that would seem unfortunate. There's a concern also about biases being inherited from these models, and one of them would be confirmation bias, right? You may have seen there was a concern that ChatGPT might be behaving in a rather sycophantic way towards users, kind of telling us what we want to hear and praising us too indiscriminately about what geniuses we are when we express our ideas. So, I think it's good that these models seem to be encouraging when we have, if you test some ideas, usually they'll be encouraging. I think we can all benefit from encouragement, but when it's indiscriminate or excessive, then it's not good, right? And yeah, you also need other perspectives, to not fall prey to confirmation bias. And that could be made worse by the publish or perish imperative, right? If we start to prioritize, getting, stuff published as fast as possible, these risks become worse. The solutions here, there's a couple of things that can be done for the risk of stylistic homogenization. The idea of personalized LLMs provides one possibility. Like if you could train a model to write like you, if you already have your own style, you could teach the LLM to write in your own style, and then you would not be writing like ChatGPT. ChatGPT would write like you. It would be better, right? Ensuring a substantial contribution to the final output seems like a very important rule, generally, when we use AI. Maybe getting inputs from more than one LLM to avoid, create more diversity of sources, but also making sure we use them as supplements to intellectual exchanges with other humans, rather than as substitutes. Right, that could be a risk. Turning away from humans to just talk to AI. And generally speaking, I think that points to a concept that I like to call responsible inefficiency. The idea that there are trade-offs here between maximal efficiency and quality or other values we care about. So what we need to do is accept that we cannot have maximum efficiency. We have to accept some inefficiency to promote those other values, like diversity, making sure we contribute enough, and so on. I'm already over time, so let me really quickly finish. I think that's the final important consideration I wanted to highlight, which is the environmental impact of generative AI, which people are not always aware of, but you may have heard that tools like LLMs have high electricity demands, also demands on water to cool down the hardware, and they can lead to an increase in CO2 emissions, both during training and when we use them. Sometimes you hear that a typical ChatGPT query consumes many times more energy than a basic Google search. You see different estimates in different places, but often it says between 5 to 10 times more energy. So this, well, one advice that can be given here is that we should not use these tools when, say, Google search could do the job we want to do. I think that's a good rule of thumb. I'm not saying it will solve the problem on its own. So we could have take a stronger view and say that we should generally try to minimize the use of generative AI. I think this idea runs into problems. One is that it's likely to fail if it's entirely voluntary, right? I don't think it would be tough to get enough uptake to have all collective effort to really minimize the use of those tools, given how useful people find them. So you have a collective action problem here. You also have potentially some unfairness, right? You have people who are highly environmentally conscious who deprive themselves of the tools, and then those who don't care and just use them to their heart's content, and they're going to reap the benefits. And the conscientious people are going to get hurt, and maybe in the end, the environmental impact will still be very bad. So then your sacrifice seems useless, your personal sacrifice. So more kind of perhaps coercive or collective response is probably required. Perhaps somewhat extreme solution would be to enforce limits on use, demanding that these tech companies not allow us to use these tools beyond a certain degree, right? Like so many queries per month or something like that. You could have a metric. You say that, oh, this is environmentally sustainable. I think that would have a greater chance of working. I mean, I'm not sure how politically realistic it would be, and it's also quite extreme. It's corrosive. So perhaps less corrosive solutions are a more promising solution. There are less resource intensive forms of AI that we could use, like small language models that we propose a solution. So they're not trained on as many data, they're more specialized, but they also consume much less energy. Also, if we could develop clean energy, that would help. Right? We could generate more energy without releasing more CO2 into the atmosphere. But then we get into technological and scientific challenges. Hopefully we will be able to do that. There are additional concerns, but I should really stop here. If you have such concerns, you can raise them now in the discussion time. Inequalities, digital literacy, probably worth highlighting. These tools, some of these tools are only available against certain payments, and maybe not everyone can afford them. So then probably if they really provide a huge advantage, then there seems to be a reason for institutions to make them more widely available. So thanks for your attention. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Professor Erler, for this very informative presentation. I don't know if you need a break or the audience needs a small break, or if we can just move on to the discussion. Okay.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. If you have any questions, and also I encourage you, for example, if you engage with these tools and have like practical examples of troubles or questions that come to your mind, just please feel free to share it with everybody.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was interesting. Actually, I was thinking about the final issue, the environmental problems. I think actually that the companies, these machines should inform the users that it leads to these environmental issues. It should be maybe somewhere written or something like when you have, sometimes when you just buy some products, it could be written there and like labels that is leads to some disasters, and I think the company should do the same, probably, because it's really not that obvious, I would say, for just common users, this topic. Also, I think I have a question, Professor. How do you think can AI LLMs programs really generate new ideas? Because basically, what I use it for is usually for summarizing some articles, but I think still it's basically like just allocating your work to like a friend, and you know that he does it differently from what you do, right? So it's just basically, it's just a different way. It's so different from what you do. Or I could just engage with him in a sort of a dialogue and discussion about some things that are interesting for me. And I'm really kind of curious, whether it's really possible to create new ideas, to create new things, or it's just a repetition of what has already been told by somebody else or by the data it has. Yeah, this was sort of a question. Thank you.
Thanks. So I think your first point is very good. I guess we would describe that as a nudge, maybe. So mandating information about the environmental impact of any query on these tools. I agree that this could definitely have an impact. In fact, I was recently reading a book about something else where the author was talking about how people in a house where they made the electric meter publicly visible in the entrance led to a significant reduction in electricity consumption. When people every day would see how much they were consuming, they naturally lowered their consumption. So I think it could certainly work in this context as well. And we would have, it would be less restrictive than saying, oh, you have only so many queries per month that you can do. So that I agree, it would be an interesting idea worth exploring. On your second question, whether these tools can really come up with new ideas, I think it depends what we mean exactly by that. I think in a strong sense, it seems not really so far. If by strong sense I mean innovative ideas that could be kind of game-changing, right? I don't know, like the theory of relativity or something like that. Some really new idea that would really reshape our understanding of the world. I don't think I don't think AIs have accomplished that yet, although maybe some might quibble with me about that. I don't know if you're a fan of some board games, you might point out that AlphaZero came up with amazing new moves at Go, for example. Or was it AlphaGo initially, but AlphaZero is even better. So maybe even in this strong sense, you could find some fields where AI meets this threshold. But overall, I agree that it tends more to be helping humans be more effective or produce new ideas faster, but a human contribution seems to be needed for true innovation and doing something really groundbreaking. AI systems don't tend to do these things on their own. I think in a weaker sense, we can say that they do new things, like these LLMs, for example, that, in the sense of producing text that has not been produced before. They're not just copying from what exists. Of course, they draw from these huge amounts of data, but generally they don't just copy and paste from their database verbatim. They'll create new sentences that have never been written before. Sometimes I find they'll suggest distinctions that you don't find in the literature, but that you can find useful. I found that in my teaching, where they were ChatGPT was using a distinction to explain the guy's ideas to me, and I thought, well, that's a smart way of putting it. So it's not going to transform philosophy, but I think it was quite innovative still, and if I found that in the students' writing, I would think, yeah, that's really clever, that's really good. So I find that already quite impressive, even though it's not innovative or novel in the strong sense. Was there any other aspect to your question? No, okay.
Thank you, Professor. I want to ask, what do you think the limit of AI? Do you think is it the emotion? They don't have emotion, but we have? Because it's like when I use AI, I think it's just a linguistic model. It helped me understand different relations with different words, like the symbol, the system of symbol, our culture. But it doesn't have, when I read this, it doesn't have that kind of embodiment experience. I think that is the difference between me and AI. Do you agree with this?
Yes, I do think that's one important thing that separates us from those systems. I'm inclined to say emotions are a process that only conscious beings can experience, and as far as we can tell, current AI systems are not conscious. Some people have claimed that they have evidence that they were, like the Google engineer who got fired a few years ago, but I don't think his arguments were very convincing. And you're right to say that they're not embodied beings in the way we are, so that also constrains the kinds of things, the kinds of properties that they can have. So on this, I would agree, yes, we are different from AI systems. Could in principle an AI system have emotions? Maybe. I don't claim to know what the preconditions for consciousness exactly are. It's a very difficult issue, and there's still no consensus on that. But it would have to be different from current AI systems. That's for sure.
So if it is like that, also just now you mentioned about AI could be a way that we have self-education. But like our traditional education, the relationship between teacher and student, the embodiment experience is also important. So what's the challenge if AI become more pervasive in education and students rely on AI as a tutor more and more? And maybe, just you mentioned like we maybe have different form of writing, etc.
Thanks. So, yeah, that's an interesting question, and maybe we need more evidence to be able to answer it confidently, because it's still kind of a new phenomenon. So, you know, to what extent are these interactions, like an AI-student interaction, different from a student-teacher interaction? Clearly there are going to be differences, and I think depending on individual personalities, there could be differences as well. I suppose some students will have a better experience or welcome the experience with the AI more than others. You may have people who don't or much prefer having a real, interaction with a real tutor or teacher, and others who are quite happy with talking to a chatbot, for example. So there could be individual differences there. I think it will also depend on how AI evolves in the future. There are already these different modes of interaction. You can see that also with some of these digital clones, right? That's one of the phenomena of the applications that is discussed today. You can create simulations of people, chatbots, for instance, that simulate a real person, try to talk the way they talk, and simulate their personality and beliefs and preferences and so on. And sometimes deceased people, then they're called grief bots. That's kind of a big phenomenon as well, including in China, apparently. And these can take various forms. You can have just a chatbot. You could have a voice, a synthetic voice talking to you, or you could have even an avatar, digital avatar. And in the future, you could have, certainly it will be possible to have something like a deep fake that makes you have an experience very similar to talking to a professor on Google Meet or Zoom. So it's unclear to what extent there will be very strong differences in the actual experience, subjective experience in the interaction. Of course, you might know that you are talking to an AI, which might change the nature of your experience, probably will change the nature of your experience, but we should also remember more and more people and future generations will grow up with AI. They will grow up in a world where having AI everywhere seems to be the norm, unless we get, I have a friend in Switzerland who thinks we'll soon exhaust all the resources needed to make AI systems, and there'll be a big crash and we'll have to go back to living like in the 1950s or before. I suspect he's wrong, he could be right. But unless something like that happens, we will be in an AI-saturated world, and future generations may find it quite natural to interact with AIs in the way maybe many of us today don't, or find it less natural. So I suspect it should not be a problem from an educational perspective. It could be a problem if it leads to big job displacement, or there could be other problems linked to social skills, maybe if we're all used to interacting with AIs, and the AIs, they're like always agreeable, always adjusting to us, we don't have to adjust to them, like we have to adjust to other real people around us. That could have that detrimental impact, I imagine. That would be distinct from the educational impact, right? I think from an educational perspective, it's unclear what the drawback would be, right? Because the AI is always available. The AI might figure out exactly what you know, where you don't understand something. It's always going to adjust to where you are, what your needs are. So in principle, it should really be ideal. Yes.
The last one is, I want to know, what do you think about our subjectivity being changed when we are using AI? Will it be more multiple subjectivity or multiple selves is developing because it's like creating different simulacra of subject.
And you think that it will change us to make us have more multiple selves? You are suggesting? Could you just clarify that?
Yes, because like we have our relationship with people is not so much like face to face, like facing teacher or classmates, but more we have discussions with AI and generating like a different subject, and will it also just make a difference of our relationships to ourselves?
Could it affect our relationships with other people? Yes, and I think that there are concerns there. So one concern is, will we have fewer such relationships? I think that would be one of my concerns. Will we spend more time talking to AIs, less time talking to other humans? That would be, maybe a bad thing. Sometimes, the optimists are saying, it's not that we're gonna spend less time talking to other humans, but we'll spend more time talking to the humans who matter to us. We'll spend more time with our friends and relatives, but we spend less time talking to maybe strangers because we won't have to talk to the hairdresser to book an appointment, or buy stuff, make bookings for plane tickets or whatever. AIs will take care of all of this. So, okay, that's the optimistic view. But I think that there is a concern about more like kind of social atomization and fewer human interactions. Then, in terms of how it might change like the nature of our interactions with others, which I think is what your question was more focused on. That's difficult to anticipate. Is this going to, improve our interactions because we'll all be more knowledgeable, right? Thanks to AI, we'll have first-rate educations, we'll have very high quality educations with our friends and colleagues and relatives and so on. Or you could imagine more pessimistic outcomes. Would it increase polarization? There's always this concern about technology driving polarization in society. If people are in information silos, and some people consume things that are from one ideological bent and some others from other sources, and there's very little overlap, and people have different views of the world, and they might start to demonize each other and find it difficult to find common ground. Maybe, also this idea of concern about confirmation bias. AI is telling us what we want to hear. If we spend too much time doing that, then when we finally confronted with people who don't treat us like that, will that have a bad impact? So, I don't know. Maybe, again, I think we can. I'm not suggesting we should be determinists about this. I think it depends how we use these tools, right? There are more or less constructive ways of using them. And if we can avoid some of these risks, I think they don't need to have a serious negative impact on our social relationships. But if they're used the wrong way, I think they could.
Thank you, Professor. My question is more ambiguous, maybe, about so in academia we also submit papers to the journals, and also about, so my question is about academic integrity. And an important part of this is the responsible, as you talked in the beginning of the speech. So how do we responsibly use AI, and what does it mean by using AI responsibly when submitting a paper? what is the responsibility of the author when we use AI in our papers, writing our papers, or maybe analyzing the data, collecting the data? What is the responsibility?
So I would say responsible use, again, and highlight this principle that I mentioned, which is, make sure we have made a substantial contribution to the final output, and also taking responsibility for everything, all the claims made in the article that you're submitting, which means, you want to fact check, you want to make sure there was no errors were introduced by the AI system. That would be part of it. Then, so now journals have policies right surrounding AI. Usually when you look at the submission guidelines, you will find maybe most journals should have these guidelines for AI, how do they think you can use it, and usually, in my experience, but I think it might differ from field to field and from journal to journal, but many of them, in my experience, would say things just like, large language models are not suitable for being listed as authors, right? So don't list ChatGPT as a co-author, but mention if you've used it, you mention that there should be a section like acknowledgements or something where you mention that you use the tool and roughly how you used it. I mean, many journals have this kind of policy. I think that's a very reasonable policy. So responsible use of AI in that case means complying with the journal's policy, generally speaking, knowing what the policy is and complying with it. And I think that won't raise problems as long as the editors are reasonable. I did have a conversation with some colleagues about this topic recently at my institute, and one colleague mentioned that, to our knowledge, there are editors who use these AI detection tools and will reject submissions if the percentage that appears on the tool is too high to their taste. Now, if that's the case, I found that highly disturbing, I have to say. Again, maybe it depends what percentage they're using as the threshold, but I think potentially there's a risk that these people are discriminating against AI users, right? So even if you use AI in a way that I personally would consider responsible, you implement the kind of principles I've outlined. But because you've used AI to check your grammar and test your arguments and maybe clean up some language and so on, then the editor will reject your paper. I think that if some editors are doing that, that is highly irresponsible and counterproductive. But let's hope there aren't too many of them. They will change their minds if there are some people who do that. But overall, yeah, that would be my answer.
I think I would like to connect my own question with this, and it's more about the diversity of approaches and flexibilities between different academic journals, and also students who might want to pursue a career in academic research and are trained in certain ways depending on the single faculty's policy or the professor's policy, whatever. Isn't that going to create also some challenges and problems, because people will have to constantly readapt themselves to those standards, and also in terms of like international platforms of research exchanges, maybe some unfairness in terms of like, I don't want to say competition, but in general, how scholars are gonna, like the possibilities for people to access places of visibility, for example.
Mm-hmm. I think there could be risks. I think this could work in different ways. Some are suggesting that for instance, for people whose first language is not English or who have challenges with English, that these LLMs can be very useful also to help level the playing field, because they can correct your language and they're cheaper than using a human editor, traditional editing services. So that could supposedly help open up some opportunities for some people who so far were more kind of at a disadvantage. Now you're right to suggest that there is a need eventually to adjust the way we work and acquire literacy, proficiency when using these tools, and that's somewhat burdensome. And of course, the faster technology evolves, the bigger this becomes, this phenomenon. So yes, I don't know whether that leads to something we might call unfair. I think yes, if some people don't have access to the tools or don't have access to ways of adjusting their skill set and acquiring this literacy, then that is a problem, and you want to see if there can be action to remedy that. Say, if some tools are expensive, the subscription is expensive, you hope, and if really having access to the tool it makes a big difference, then the institutions should try and have some, I don't know, an institutional subscription, and then all the students have access to the tool. They don't have to pay for it. That could be part of the solution. And also education, training in digital literacy would also be part of the solution. I think it remains still to be seen to what extent using those tools confers a big advantage over those who don't use them. Like, there might be people who naturally write very fast and are very prolific, and maybe for them, switching to these tools might not make such a difference. I don't know. But we are running this experiment still, but I suppose it will make a difference, especially increasingly, as they become more powerful.
And also, if you could say a little bit about the idea of prompt, namely the way that you formulate your questions or give the kind of input that you give to the AI would also influence the response and the efficiency or the quality of the output generated through the AI.
Yes, that is part of how we can make sure we get more of what we want from these tools. Here maybe, unfortunately, some of our values might push in different directions. So if we come back to the environmental thing, right? The environmental concerns suggest we should avoid, minimize the number of queries we make, try and just use Google if that's good enough. But then on the other hand, if we want, say, like a diversity of perspectives and not just have a one-sided view of a topic, one way would be to ask the LLM to give us slightly different perspectives, give me some arguments for this view or against this, or what could be maybe a neglected perspective on this topic. And that can help, I think. But that speaks in favor of the opposite, right? You of more use of the LLM, more intensive use, more queries, which is not environmentally friendly apparently. So unfortunately, then we may have some conflicts there between different values. But yes, generally, it seems that knowing how to write your prompts can definitely make a difference to how helpful the results are. Some of the people who have written about that say that sometimes you can tell the LLM that it has a certain personality, and then you will get the kind of perspective you want on whatever question you're asking, or such as you are a publisher, or you are a certain type of reader you might want to reach with your article, and give me some comments. How do you respond to this thing that I've written, and so on. So that there seems to be an art to, yes, prompting these tools.
Thank you, Professor. And I have one abstract question and another more practical question. The first one is, we tend to draw lines between human and AI. And but actually AI needs a lot of human contribution. And so can we actually regard AI as a part of our humanity? The second question is about something like data privacy of using AI. For example, because personally I use AI to transcribe my interviews, and sometimes I find it a little bit, I'm not sure because I'm not very, I don't know if AI will use my data, because but the interviews are supposed to be confidential. So sometimes I find it a little bit unsure about using AI to transcribe my interviews or sharing some confidential information. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think you're right to be concerned about that. Now, these tech firms have privacy policies, which we could read in detail, and I'm sure they're going to offer us some reassurances about how our data are used. But generally speaking, yes, I think it's important to be cautious, and if you have any really sensitive or confidential data, think about ways of, well, either not share them with these tools or find some way of anonymizing them or concealing the sensitive parts of them. I've done that with, I guess, if I wanted, say I wanted to get some help with writing a recommendation letter, and part of the data to be used was the student's CV. I would make sure, if I gave some parts of the CV to the AI, that I removed all the identifiers, the names, and anything that I think would help identify the student. Then it takes more time, of course, but yes, I think it's worth thinking about that and asking yourself if there's a risk that some data, some confidential data, could be getting outside your control. And sometimes, sometimes these privacy concerns emerge even independently of the company's own choices, right? There have been databases that contain some confidential data, and some users have found ways of getting those data from the model just by asking the right prompts. They found some people's social security numbers that were part of the data set, even though the data set was no longer publicly available. So that's something to bear in mind. Then your first question about distinguishing AI from humans, I would say, for now I think we can distinguish the two quite clearly. So AIs are a product of human ingenuity, but they are not human. They are tools, computational tools that we created that are quite spectacular and have human-like behavior increasingly. They can mimic human-like behavior. Maybe in the future these boundaries will be blurred. Who knows? The future might be quite strange and quite different from now. So maybe there will be AI-human hybrids. Some would say there already are. People with neural implants and things like that. I mean, it's still, I don't, cyborgs, I guess, cyborg is the technical term. I don't think this creates confusions around categories yet, but in the future, who knows, maybe that will happen.
So probably we can end here. What do you think? Okay. Thank you very much for this productive session, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.